A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we like to check in on the political agenda for the week ahead. Michelle Pearse is the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle's back with us. Hey, Michelle, welcome back to 2020.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
Michelle, let's talk about something that happened on the weekend. Announcement from the eSafety Commissioner doubling down on the way they're wanting to deal with the issues around that attack that we saw in that Christian church in Western Sydney. Mari Emmanuel at the centre of all this. What have you seen over the weekend as these developments have taken place?
Yeah, so there was just a case last Friday where the eSafety Commissioner is claiming that that material constitutes as extremely violent or what's called Class 1 video material. But however, there's some suggestion that this coverage of the attack that was targeted for takedown because it actually excites sympathy for him as a Christian figure who's outspoken on matters of Christian faith, and especially because of his criticism of Islam and progressive ideology. So we're seeing an increase in powers of the eSafety Commissioner through various legislative means that end up impacting on serious matters of freedom of discourse, freedom of speech. And we believe that the takedown of this material isn't because it was violent, but is actually because of who Bishop Mari is and what he stands for.
Is it the case that when you get something like this, and, everyone wants not to have all that violent content online, but if you take away the violent content online, then you have a major ramification for freedom of speech, and somehow or other you've got to look further ahead and see what the effects might be of making a decision one way or another. How are you seeing things around that issue as a freedom of speech type issue and something that might well impact on the way that we're able to speak openly into the future?
Sure, and you referenced it there. There are legitimate, violent, horrific content online, sexual material that absolutely should be censored. We shouldn't be able to see that stuff. Kids shouldn't be able to accidentally stumble across it or easily find it. So there needs to be restrictions and censorship of some sort, and we applaud the government. Last week they announced that they'll be piloting age verification technology so children can't accidentally stumble across harmful material. But what we're seeing is freedom of speech, political discourse, our religious views being thrown into this basket of hateful and harmful online content of what they're saying is hateful and harmful, and then limiting our ability to be able to speak openly on the issues that really matter for us. And, Christians have been advocates for freedom for a long time, from freedom of slavery, freedom of religion. We know that the decision to follow Christ is a free choice, not something that should ever be forced or coerced. And, people should be free to choose their religion. But we also acknowledge that there's a great sinfulness of man and that corruption inevitably accompanies a concentration of power. And so we're seeing this concentration of power in groups like the eSafety Commissioner and within that communications department, which limit freedom of discourse. And where this concentration of power exists, that should be resisted.
Concentration of power, we're thinking of where our government might put some sort of limits on the things that we're able to see or that children are able to access. There's also this concentration of power that could be in the hands of people who are big tech leaders, talking about the Elon Musks of this world, who's certainly at the centre of this whole issue here. So when we talk about concentration of power, somebody's getting the concentration of power, aren't they? Does there need to be some sort of balance in there? What are your thoughts here, Michelle?
Yeah, well, Elon Musk, is an interesting example because he's an advocate for freedom, yet even he is being forced to take down posts. And so that sends a message to all social media platforms that they've got to be careful. And it has, when the government powers increase to censor, to place fines or restrictions, that sends a real chilling effect. And then what happens is the social media platforms end up over-censoring content. And we're already seeing that. Posts of Christians, organisations like ours, we constantly get our posts taken down, as well as other organisations with similar views are already being censored. And so so it's important that we do what we can to advocate for the limiting of these powers so that there remains a freedom, because Christians have a view that needs to be heard in society about, the protective role of parents in the family, the best interests of the child, especially when we're seeing a move with gender ideology, that kids can define who they want to be. We see there's dangers in this. So Christians have a legitimate view when it comes to gender. There's also a growing body of an ideology really that's saying that children are sexual beings, that minor attracted people is a legitimate condition, removing that stigma from pedophilia. These are really dangerous ideas that are being propagated within our social media, and they need to be challenged. So it's important that Christian viewpoints are heard. If we're not heard, it will lead to catastrophic consequences for society. As Christians, we have a message of goodness and grace. We speak a countercultural message that society needs to hear. And it's not just a message for the church, it's a message for culture, like our gender, our views on sexuality, that we have biblical views, our pro-life views, that life is in the womb is sacred and should be protected. They're not harmful messages, they're life-giving messages and must continue to be heard in public spaces.
As I hear you reflecting on those things, I think back to our heritage here in Australia, which has had this Christian foundation. So when we're talking about issues around, sexualization of children, of course, that's never been a part of a Christian ethos, or when we talk about even the violence that we might be seeing on social media, or as you say, even the pro-life issues. But as we get detached from those understandings of what's true and what is right and the way we live our lives in some level of peace and harmony and able to raise our children, all we're left with is one party battling against another. This sort of minority war that goes on when you're detached from the foundations that we've seen. And that, of course, seems to be fueling what we think of as an authoritarianism, because whoever wins by influencing with their power, don't they?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, because what are they going to censor? How are they going to manipulate what's being heard on social media that will end up dictating the way that people think through the issues? When one view is silenced and the only one view is able to be heard on social media, well, that has huge ramifications on how our society is going to, what they're going to lean towards. When the Christian view is silenced and not even heard, then they don't even get an opportunity to consider this other side, which is so desperately needed to be heard today with all of the cultural issues that we're dealing with at this point in time.
Michelle, what's your view on the e-safety commissioner and, her very, perhaps noble attempts to rein in what's happening with violent content? Where do you think the e-safety commissioner ought to be standing on this whole issue?
Yeah, well, we're really concerned that in such a very short space of time, the powers of the e-safety commissioner have rapidly expanded. In the beginning, when the Online Safety Act was first constructed, it was about preventing cyberbullying material targeted at an Australian child. The focus was the well-being of children. But now these powers are something completely different. So currently there's very little control over the terms of use that social media platforms have, which allow them to remove content, that allow the social media platforms to shadow ban or deplatform those who are posting content. So we know that censorship is already happening, but the Online Safety Act will go even further now to incentivise platforms to censor because of the penalties for failing to comply with the e-safety commissioner. And when we saw that with the orders against X, Elon Musk, if the government can force Elon Musk to remove posts, this is significant power. And social media platforms beyond X will feel backed into a corner.
I'm sure there are some people who think when we talk about these things somehow rather as Christians, we might be just, playing around the edges. But the depth of the consequences for the whole nation here, and I know that even in the ACL You've been talking about the sort of consequences of not having some level of freedom of speech that defends our opportunity to be able to speak, even with the freedom of political communication. If you can't do that, if you can't speak up as a Christian and have your say, whether it's a morality issue or some level of ethics, you're headed towards a totalitarian state. And these are steps away from that. But we're on that direction, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. And as I said, that it's already happening. The Christian perspective is already not allowed a fair and even-handed hearing. And we see Christians being silenced on having a say on public policy issues such as, like I said before, the best interests of the child, challenging the gender narrative. And, it may mean content that expresses beliefs of Christians are removed because of the false notion that some mainstream religious beliefs are seen as harmful. And it's this language of harmful and hateful that's dictating the narrative around this at the moment, to say that the Christian view on sexuality is hateful, is harmful because it offends people. And that's really dangerous, because the view that we have, we know we don't hate, and our intent is certainly not to harm. But we actually believe that our message is life-giving. And like you said, the message that we are created in the image of God, that freedom is an inherent value that we have, that was given to us by God, freedom of choice. These are all really important issues of concern culturally that need to have an airing.
You're working on these things all the time, and I know you've got a team. You work tirelessly, Michelle. How to bring insight and information into the corridors of power, how Christians think about these things. We've got a firm foundation on which we stand, our ethics and our faith and our aspirations for freedom for the future. But how do you think we keep politicians in check? I mean, you'll be meeting those politicians in the corridors at Parliament House. You'll be having your say when you sit down in their offices. There's no guarantee they're listening to every word you're saying. No guarantee they're actually putting and implementing some of those things that you know and I know will bring a level of safety for the future. How do you think, as listeners are listening to our conversation today, how do we keep our politicians in check?
Well, it's important we have the conversations, because politicians are also only hearing one narrative a lot of the time. And so on the misinformation, disinformation bill, when that came out, I was able to sit down with the Department of, with Minister Michelle Rowland, who's the Minister for Communications, and talk about how this language of hate and harm is often used against Christians to take down posts. Now, I don't think she was aware of the extent of that. And so having that discussion then opened up the door for me to go and sit down with the online safety strategy and research team and explain to them the implications that these sorts of legislation, which they think is targeted towards actual violent and horrific material, but how because of the prevailing political ideology, Christian posts get caught up in this. So it's important to have the conversations, to not completely write it off and think, well, there's no hope to convince anybody. We do have a powerful message. Our message is rooted in common sense. And so we should make submissions to the government. We should have those conversations. We should sign those petitions and take action, because they are noticed. We have a view that, like I said, it's common sense, it's reasonable. When we articulate it clearly, we are heard, and we are seeing some changes and amendments made to things like the misinformation, disinformation bill, and we're yet to see changes in the Online Safety Act, but we've got to believe that the more we push, the more we advocate, the more we have those conversations, that it does make a real difference.
So there is change that is afoot, and when you mention changes to the Online Safety Act and misinformation, disinformation, these latest moves, even over the weekend from the E-Safety Commissioner, all of these play into how our freedom of speech is affected. What do you think is ahead with changes to the Online Safety Act?
Well, I think if there is a really strong resistance, that we could hold off through just political pressure, the changes that will increase the powers of the E-Safety Commissioner. This is a debate that's being had globally at the moment. So we're really at a crossroads of will our freedom to be able to say what we want to say, add to political discourse, religious freedom of speech. Which direction will it go? And that is determined really by firstly our response as Christians, I think, to pray, to advocate, but also really what the will of God and what the plan of God is in all of this. But the clear message that I think Christians need to hear across the nation is that don't let yourself be silenced out of fear of the law or fear of what the government might say, fear of censorship. We've just got to continue to get the message out for you, from whatever means as possible. If they do silence our ability to speak out on online platforms, we've just got to find another way, because our message is really needed at this cultural moment. It's really important. And we don't want censorship powers to be an excuse for us not to continue to propagate our message.
As you say, this is a very significant moment in time and a challenge for every Christian believer listening to a conversation like this today to understand that there are dangers around censorship, and particularly for Christian believers, because the time may come, and I'll get your thoughts here, Michelle, when Christians are seen to be the ones who are propagating the hate speech. Of course, that's the furthest from the truth. But Christians being seen as subversive and being shut down. If we don't deal with the freedom of speech issues, there are major ramifications and dangers for Christians into the future, aren't there?
That's right. And we have to operate from that firm conviction that our message is one of truth, but our message is also one of grace. It's truth and grace together. And so within this environment where it becomes more and more hostile, Christians are getting angry that our posts and the things that we want to say are being taken down. They're getting angry at the government. But we've got to remember that through it all, we are Christians. We are people that carry the fruit of the Spirit. So in all of our responses, we have to remain Christian in our character, Christian in our response. Otherwise, those comments that we're hateful, we don't want to give any excuse for those sorts of accusations against us to be justified. We know we're not hateful people. We know we have a message of truth, and it's truth in love, truth in grace. And so as Christians, we got to make sure we're disciplined in our response in the way that we speak about the government, the way that we speak to government, that we're respectful to authority, that we remain humble, and that we pray for our nation's leaders, and that we speak a message of truth with grace. It's truth and grace together.
Undoubtedly, there'll be some listening into our conversation right now, Michelle, who are thinking, well, it's great getting these updates on a Monday morning with the Australian Christian Lobby. We get to tackle lots of great and really important issues, but how do people get subscribed to receive updates from you? Because you've got updates coming from your national Director of Politics, Wendy Francis. You've got a team all around the country. They've got specialist areas that they are really across, and there's lots of good things coming through the week and not just on a Monday. How do people get to be a subscriber to getting those emails into their inbox and keeping up to date with these changes?
Yeah, it's really important that every Christian Australian in the nation receives our news, because we need to be up to date with what's happening and the little action that you can take that actually, if lots of people do it, it has a massive influence. So it's really important to sign up. All you need to do is go to the website acl.org.au and sign up there. You're not becoming a member of an organisation. You're simply signing up to receive our e-news, and also follow us on socials, because we put daily updates on that as well. But Neil, if I might take the liberty, we've got a webinar coming up actually tomorrow evening with the Honourable John Anderson, who's graciously accepted to come on this webinar and to talk about the state of the nation. The webinar's called The Tide Can Turn. So if you're feeling a bit heavy about what's going on in culture, as certainly I do at times, I need to be reminded that there is hope in the gospel, there's hope in the future of our nation, but it really does depend on us and our response to what's going on. So come and be encouraged by Honourable John Anderson. Jim Wallace, the chairman of the ACL board, Jim was significant in getting ACL off the ground in those early years. He'll be on there as well. And our state directors, as you mentioned, we have an amazing team all around the nation, somebody representing ACL in every state, and they'll be sharing news about what's going on in their state as well. So one not to be missed.
Okay, access that webinar at the ACL website, acl.org.au, acl.org.au, and check out all of the resources that are available. And I know that on the ACL's website they also have all sorts of issues that you can follow along. and you can be a part of, there's what's this, the standing army, because we've got some elections coming up, and ACL doesn't just stand still when there is elections going on. How do you get people in electorates, in states and territories all around Australia to be involved in the processes of change? How do you do that then, Michelle?
It's important that people know who their candidates are, know what the major parties stand for, and know what their candidates stand for as well. So we run Meet Your Candidate forums in mostly in marginal seats where we know we can have an effect on the outcome if Christians are informed. And we also have web pages and things that people can access so that they're well informed about the major parties and where candidates stand as well. So where there's a really good candidate, somebody standing for Christian values, we'll make sure that Christians know who they are. And if you're a Christian candidate in particularly in a marginal seat, please be in contact with ACL.
Great update. Michelle Pearse is the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au, to get up to date, to get subscribed, to be a part of webinars, and to find out all sorts of good resources that can keep you in the know so that you can be equipped to take action when you're called on. Michelle Pearse, thanks so much for taking some time to share these thoughts with listeners today on 2020.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.